The year was 2087, and Earth had already lost. The Zorvath came without warning. One moment the night sky was quiet, the next it filled with black wedges that eclipsed the moon. Their ships were kilometers long, matte obsidian, drinking in radar and light alike. No radio hail, no declaration of war, just the silent opening of bays and the descent of drop pods that hit every major city like iron rain. Within 48 hours the combined militaries of humanity were ash. Railguns melted, satellites fell in burning streaks, and the sky turned the color of bruised copper under the invaders' atmospheric processes. The Zorvath did not conquer, they harvested. Cities were ring-fenced, populations counted, and the useful biomass marched into conversion plants. The rest were left to starve or flee into irradiated wastelands. By the end of the first month, the human population had dropped from 9 billion to under 800 million. Governments were memories. The internet was a corpse. The only voices left on the airwaves were the cold, translated commands of the Zorvath overseers, repeated in every language at once. Compliance ensures continuation. In the ruins of Geneva, a woman named Dr. Mara Valdez crawled through the skeletal remains of CERN's old campus. She had once been lead theorist on the Alcubierre-Exner warp group. Now she was a scavenger with radiation burns on half her face, and a stolen Zorvath power cell strapped to her back like a tumor. She was looking for the ring. Most people thought the ring had been destroyed in the first wave. The Zorvath had made sure to target every particle accelerator on the planet. But CERN had built a second secret ring beneath the Jura Mountains, funded by black budgets after the 2049 Singapore Accords. It was smaller, only 12 kilometers across, but it had been designed from the start for one purpose: to punch a hole in space-time and step through it. Mara found the entrance shaft sealed under a collapsed cafeteria. She spent 3 days digging with a plasma cutter and her bare, bleeding hands. When she finally dropped into the access tunnel, the emergency lights flickered on, powered by a geothermal tap that the Zorvath had never discovered. The ring was intact. She wasn't alone for long. Word travels strangely in Apocalypse. A former Chinese orbital marine with a missing arm. A teenage math prodigy from Mumbai who had walked across half of Asia carrying nothing but a notebook. An Australian farmer who brought seeds and a talent for fixing anything with wire and hope. They came one by one, then in dozens. The last survivors who still believed equations mattered more than guns. They called themselves the Fold. For 4 years the Fold lived like moles beneath the Jura. They ate algae grown in coolant pipes, they spoke in whispers, and they worked. The Zorvath had gravity weapons, manipulators that could crush tanks into foil. The Fold studied the wreckage and learned. The invaders folded space to travel, the Fold would fold it harder, faster, meaner. Mara's breakthrough came on a night when the auroras were blood-red from particulate iron in the stratosphere. She realized the Zorvath drive wasn't creating warp bubbles. It was borrowing them from higher dimensions and paying the energy debt later. Humanity couldn't afford the interest, so they wouldn't pay it at all. They would steal. The plan was insane. They would overcharge the ring, force a cascade failure in local space-time, and ride the rupture like a surfer on a tsunami. No destination calculated, no return ticket. Just away. Somewhere the Zorvath weren't. And if the math was right, if the Exner coefficients held, there was a microscopic chance the rupture would snap back along the invaders' own folded pathways like a rubber band. A chance to drag the war to them instead of waiting to die here. They voted at gunpoint because hope is a violent thing. The motion passed. On the 5th anniversary of Invasion Day, the Fold opened the ring. Deep under the mountain, 12 kilometers of superconducting coils screamed as power from 3 stolen Zorvath antimatter cells poured into them. Reality groaned. The air tasted of ozone and copper. Scientists who had not seen sunlight in years wept openly at their consoles. Mara stood at the master station, her burned face lit by the red emergency strobes. She typed the final command with trembling fingers. Initiate fold. The ring did not open a gate. It tore one. A soundless explosion of non-light ripped through the facility. Personnel vanished mid-scream, not dead, simply no longer localized. The mountain above ceased to exist in the same timeline. For one infinite second, the entire European continent was inside out. Then the rupture inverted, and humanity stepped through, not to another star, to everywhere the Zorvath were. Fleet Admiral Kreshar of the Zorvath Harvest Armada was supervising the stripping of Proxima Centauri B when his flagship's reality alarms began to howl. He had time for one confused chitter in his native tongue before the stars around him simply blinked. Human ships appeared, not the primitive chemical rockets of old Earth, but something new. Hull plating made of condensed space-time, edges that hurt to look at directly. They materialized inside shields, inside hangars, inside reactor cores. On 1,000 worlds at once, the same thing happened. A battlecruiser over Zorvath Prime found itself sharing the same volume of space with a human frigate. Both vessels tried to occupy the same coordinates. Physics chose the humans. Conversion plants on Luna were suddenly crewed by orbital marines in powered armor that bled gravity like blood. The Zorvath homeworld's planetary shield flickered once, then collapsed under the weight of 5 million human beings who had learned to walk through walls made of pure math. Kreshar watched on his dying bridge as a woman in a tattered CERN lab coat stepped out of empty air in front of him. Half her face was scar tissue. In her hand she carried an antique tablet displaying equations that made his ship's AI scream recursion errors. "You borrowed our space," Mara Valdez said in perfect Zorvath, her voice calm. "We're here to collect the debt." With interest, the Zorvath never stood a chance. They had evolved on a high-gravity world where cooperation was survival. Their entire civilization was a single organism spread across light years, linked by their borrowed folds. When humanity inverted those folds, when the fold turned every Zorvath pathway into a superhighway for vengeful apes, the invaders experienced something they had no word for: discontinuity. Their fleets were boarded by ghosts who appeared inside sealed corridors. Their overlords woke to find human children painting murals on the walls of their birthing chambers. Their core worlds, untouched for 10,000 generations, fell in hours because no one had ever designed a defense against an enemy that could step out of yesterday. The war lasted 11 days. On the 12th day, the last Zorvath matriarch broadcast surrender on every frequency. She did it from the steps of what had once been the Palais des Nations in Geneva, now miraculously restored, as if the fold had reached back and simply undone the damage. Humanity did not accept. Not out of cruelty, out of necessity. The Zorvath had no concept of mercy because they had no concept of equals. To let them live was to invite the harvest again in 1,000 years, so the fold finished what they started. They folded the entire Zorvath species into a single point smaller than an atom and anchored it outside the universe they had ravaged. A warning, a monument, a scar. Then humanity went home. Not to the poisoned Earth of 2092, but to the Earth of 5 years earlier, hours before the first Zorvath ship ever appeared. The fold had learned precision on the knife edge of extinction. They stepped out of the rupture into blue skies and unaware cities. Children played in parks that would never become mass graves. Satellites still orbited, carrying cat videos and conspiracy theories. Mara Valdez stood on the shore of Lake Geneva at sunset, watching families barbecue and laugh. Her scars were gone. The radiation poisoning, the lost years, the friends who had died screaming inside a collapsing pocket universe. All of it erased by the final, perfect fold. A young girl, she couldn't have been more than 10, ran up to her holding a cheap plastic telescope. "Lady, do you work for the space program? You look like you've seen aliens." Mara knelt, tears cutting clean tracks down unburned cheeks. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "I've seen the end of the world. And I just cancelled it." Far above, the stars looked exactly as they always had. But if you knew where to look, really knew, you could see faint silver rings where space-time had been stitched back together by human hands, scars in the firmament, proof that reality itself had been invaded, occupied, and liberated by a species that refused to die quietly. Humanity never told the public what almost happened. There was no need. The fold disbanded the same day peace was declared on a timeline that never knew war. Members scattered. Mara took a quiet teaching post at a rebuilt CERN. The Chinese Marine opened a dojo. The Australian farmer planted orchards that would outlive nations. Sometimes, late at night, one of them would look up at the stars and feel the old equations humming under their skin like a second heartbeat. They had bent space until it broke, and when it healed around humanity's fingerprints. The end.